Okay, we're over a month into the Premier League season, and I really wanted to talk to you guys today about each Premier League club, have a look at how they're doing, and pick apart their biggest issue. Now, the problems have come from you guys at home. I asked you to send in your thoughts on Twitter. Loads of you got involved. If you want to get involved next time, follow me at Joe Tomlinson. The clubs in front of me are in a totally random order, but we're going to start with Tottenham, and there were a couple of different suggestions. First and foremost was set pieces, but there was also not capitalising on possession. Now, I think not capitalising on possession is the problem we're going to focus on today, because there's been some crazy narratives developing about Spurs and Ange Postecoglou that I really want to delve into over the next couple of minutes. Let's get set pieces out of the way, because clearly it is an issue at the club. They've conceded the second most goals of any team in the Premier League since the start of last season from set pieces. But I actually think the narrative within the club has started to shift a little bit. I'm reading here Ange Postecoglou's interview from back in May when he said Tottenham have no problem defending set pieces. Now, at the time, I didn't necessarily agree with him. I think Tottenham did have major issues defending set pieces, particularly with Vicario getting off his goal line, claiming or punching. Maybe it's just me, but at the start of this season, I feel like they do look a little bit more secure from set pieces. I think the narrative has changed away from what Ange was saying back in May. Obviously, Nick Montgomery has been appointed as specialist set piece coach. I understand they conceded against Arsenal from a set piece, but Arsenal are the best set piece side in the world, and that can happen. The issue for Spurs is the narrative is then linked to the 2 goals they conceded previously to Arsenal from very similar circumstances. It doesn't look great, but I do think not scoring from high levels of possession is the slightly bigger issue for me. Because in the Premier League, they have averaged the highest percentage of possession by some distance, by almost 5%. They're at 67% average possession across the 4 games they've played so far this season. Second best is actually Man City at 62. And they are converting some of that possession into shots. They're 4th in the Premier League for shots. They are shooting from all areas, though. And this is where I think the problem starts to develop. They haven't yet been able to turn that possession and those shots into high-quality chances. They might be 4th for shots, but they're 11th for XG. They're taking shots from suspect areas. And the reason they're taking these sort of pot shots from bad areas is because they are struggling to break teams down that sit particularly in a low block. It's no secret that they struggled to break down Arsenal at the weekend, who sat in, almost a low block for the entire game. We've seen that throughout the season, and that is definitely a problem that is developing at Spurs. Because what's happening in wide areas is that teams are leaving fullbacks 1v1 versus the winger, versus Son or Brennan Johnson, whose take-on percentage is much lower in 1v1 duels than traditional wingers. So what does all this mean? Well, first and foremost, if I was ranking this problem, I would have it firmly in the give it time category. Some of the narratives that have started to develop online, in some of the punditry about Ange Postecoglou, I think it is way over the top. Yes, he might have 7 losses, 11. I think it's just 8 wins in 22. But for me, the way Tottenham play football is a clear development. It is improving. At the start of the season, you can't deny they are a lovely team to watch. Yes, they don't have the clinical nature of goal scoring yet, but I do think that's going to come. Spurs are not a title-challenging team. They're a team that are pushing for the top 4, which is exactly what Ange did last season, and I fully expect them to do again this season. 90% of the time, it's quite a good watch. Even against Arsenal, there were spells of that game where they were dominant against one of the 2 best teams in the league. So give it time, and I think the quality of chance being created will improve. And I fully back Ange. The next randomly picked team are Wolves. A few different issues here, to be honest with you. But we're going to focus on the back 4 versus the back 5 conundrum facing Gary O'Neill at the start of this season. Now, obviously, fixtures play a big role in the opening to any season, don't they? And Wolves' have been difficult. Arsenal, Chelsea, Newcastle, 3 of your first 4 games. I wouldn't expect them to win any of those games. So let's take all of these numbers with a pinch of salt. But worrying defensive trends continue from the back end of last season. They've conceded 11 goals across those 4 games. Again, tough opposition. But they are clearly struggling with this new back 4 to get the best out of the fullbacks, in my opinion. And since losing Max Kilman, not replacing him, it almost feels like Gary O'Neill's hand has been forced to a level. Ryan Ait-Nouri and Semedo It feels like both of those are better as wing-backs, particularly in Ryan Aït-Nouri's case. I much prefer him in forward areas than having to defend his own box. Now, clearly moving to a back four does benefit the midfield slightly. It allows João Gomez to be partnered by Lamina and Andre. If they can get that going across the next few games, then hopefully that midfield three can start to form something really quite special, because against Newcastle, again, they had large spells where, specifically on the counter-attack, they look really dangerous. But at the end of the day, they've won one game in the Premier League since March the 9th, and that was against Luton Town. The results have to improve, and they cannot keep conceding at 2.5 goals per 90. That will relegate you. It's a worrying trend for me, and I would personally, if I was a Wolves fan, almost be like, I want to see that back five again. I think the fullbacks look better as wing-backs, even if it's a 5-3-2. You know, Cunha and Strand Larsen potentially playing as a front two, that same midfield three, just to offer a little bit more protection. I'm not sure the back four is quite working yet, and that's proven out by the underlying numbers, the XG, and the goals conceded. But before we get to West Ham, BetterHelp are the pay partner of this video, and they're on a mission to make starting therapy easier right from your own home. They provide a safe space where you can share what's on your mind, whether it's stress, worries, or relationship issues, without fear of judgment. All you've got to do is fill out a questionnaire online, and you'll be matched with a therapist within a couple of days. Then it's up to you how you want to communicate with your trained mental health professional. Whether it's on your phone, computer, video call, phone call, even messages, it's totally up to you. One of the best features about BetterHelp is that if the first therapist doesn't feel like the right fit, you can easily switch to another till you find someone you really connect with. They also make sure that the therapists on the platform are well qualified, and there's a customer support team to help you out in any way you need. So if you're struggling and think you could benefit from a therapy session, click the link at the top of the description or go to betterhelp.com/Joe Tomlinson for 10% off your first month. West Ham, lots of suggestions wanted me to talk about Thomas Souček, still getting plenty of minutes so far this season, 225 minutes, started 3 or 4 games in the middle of the park for Julian Lopetegui. Now, is that a trend that can continue? Because his underlying numbers and his performance level from a West Ham fan's perspective, they don't seem happy. So maybe it is time to mix it up. We've seen the additions of Guido Rodriguez and Carlos Soler in the summer add to the likes of Mohamed Kudus, Paqueta, Alvarez. There is a big core of midfielders there, and I am slightly surprised to see Souček start 3 of those first 4 games, although give players time to bed in. That's not the problem we want to speak about, though. No, most West Ham fans wanted me to speak about the striker situation. Michail Antonio still getting minutes. Danny Ings having to come on and have impacts in games. Now, he, of course, scored his first goal of the season at the weekend, and I think he took it really well. The issue comes with Niclas Füllkrug, who still hasn't scored a Premier League goal yet, and still hasn't really displaced Michail Antonio as that starting number 9. Antonio has, of course, started all 4 Premier League games so far this season, but his goal-scoring numbers are a concern to West Ham fans. 11 goals scored across the last 2 seasons. I think that's over 40 fixtures to produce those 11 goals. He's, of course, never scored more than 10 Premier League goals, and many West Ham fans would have been hoping that Füllkrug could come in, lead the line, and be an instant impact player. We haven't yet seen that. Now, of course, he has had injury problems. Let's not forget that he withdrew from the international squad, didn't he, with an Achilles tendon issue. So that partly plays into the fact he hasn't started yet. It's also a new league. And like I said earlier, you've got to give players time. But I do find it interesting that Lopetegui is still using Antonio to lead the line when he has some really exciting wide options. And we saw the damage Jarrod Bowen can do through the middle last season. So I think it would only be fair to put this issue in give it time, because we haven't yet seen a fully fit Füllkrug to know whether that was the right signing or whether that was the wrong signing. It's only fair that it's allowed to develop. Nottingham Forest, problems? What problems? I was really struggling. There were barely any suggestions for Forest issues. And rightly so, they've had an absolutely sensational start to the season. I love the first team. I think Nuno Espirito Santo has set them up really, really intelligently. The squad is actually a little bit deeper than people are giving them credit for. Suppose one issue could well have been Ibrahim Sangare's torn hamstring. Looks like he's going to be out for a couple of months, but they go away to Anfield without him. The midfield balance is absolutely packed. He decides to drop Callum Hudson-Odoi and Anthony Elanga, flood the midfield with players, force Liverpool out wide, bring those two on late into the game and have a huge impact. It feels like a lot of what Nuno is trying is coming off right now, so it is hard to find a problem. But the few Forest fans that did suggest problems all suggested striker depth, and I think that's totally fair enough. Awoniyi so far this season still yet to start a game, just 25 minutes of football. And that is a continuation from last season, when he had the groin surgery, or after he had that groin surgery, he completed 90 minutes just once. If you total that out, he's not played more than 25 minutes of football for Forest in the Premier League since February. So yes, we know Awoniyi has big upside ceiling. He can and has proven he will score Premier League goals. But there is a slight reliance on Chris Wood. And he's averaging just 15 starts across the last 4 Premier League campaigns. That is a little bit of a concern. That is a little bit of a problem. Because there is a huge reliance on him to score goals. It was 14 last season. He's operating at 0.6 non-penalty expected goals per 90. If you take him out the side with Awoniyi's injury issues, who's going to play up front for Forest? Now, clearly they tried to salvage that in the summer. They went heavy for Eddie Nketiah. He ended up joining Palace. And they went heavy for Santiago Jimenez at Feyenoord. That move collapsed. He opted to stay in Holland. And now they haven't really got another option up front. So I think it is a little bit worrying. But overall, I love this Forest squad. Maybe Morgan Gibbs-White could just deputise in a false 9 position. They've got more than enough cover in the midfield, haven't they, with the addition of Elliot Anderson. I love the centre-backs as well, man. Just quickly touching upon Murillo and Milenkovic. It's my favourite centre-back pairing in the Premier League right now. For Fulham, again, hard to identify a specific issue. I spoke to JCC, I spoke to Henry Hill, 2 big Fulham fans. Both of them were saying the midfield balance still feels slightly off. That could be one of our problems. The other problem is the lack of a clinical number 9. And I can see where they're coming from in the midfield balance. Very used to Palhinha sweeping up and doing an awful lot of dirty work, with Andreas Pereira dropping a little bit deeper to facilitate Emil Smith-Rowe playing in the 10. He's partnered by Sasa Lukic. That as a midfield 3 does feel like it can get overrun at times. But right now they sit there with the 4th best defensive record in the league. Underlying numbers look pretty strong as well. So the playing style Marco Silva is operating with to replace Palhinha by utilising a slightly different formation, dropping players slightly deeper like Pereira, it's working right now. It's not a huge concern to me. Their other suggestion, though, of the number 9 issues does still concern me. Rodrigo Muniz fired extremely hot last season, didn't he? He went 8 goals in 8 games, but he scored just 9 across the course of the season. So across the other 16 matches he played, he scored 1. Raul Jimenez, since that terrible head injury, we know hasn't looked quite the same since 2019. His top scoring season was 7. That actually came last year, and he has scored a goal already. But do either of those players score at a consistent rate enough to push Fulham up the table? I've been slyly impressed by Fulham. I had them in and amongst the relegation candidates for the failure to replace Joao Palhinha, and for the exit of Willian, and for the exit of Tosin Adarabioyo. But I was really impressed come the end of the window by the business. I think they're going to be absolutely fine. Mid-table side. As for the striker problem, where does it rank? It's in here, isn't it? It's one of these two. It does worry me, I can't lie. It actually does worry me. Who's going to score Fulham's goals this season? There's going to be big pressure on Alex Iwobi, Reece Nelson, and Emil Smith-Rowe to contribute double figures, one of them. Let's go to Manchester United next then. And the problem we want to talk about here, there were a couple of issues raised. One was scything through of the midfield. The other was the lack of chances being taken. And I think that's what we're going to focus on. Because we've spoken to death about Casemiro and how quickly and easily United are broken down in transition. But in forward areas, United are actually creating a few chances. They've created the second most chances of any team in the Premier League behind Man City. But subsequent to that, they are the biggest XG underperformers of any team in the Premier League. They are not taking big chances. And that is a continued issue under Erik ten Hag. United are yet to score 60 Premier League goals in a single campaign under the Dutchman, and that must improve this season. The strikers have got to start taking their chances. Joshua Zirkzee, I thought, against Southampton, put in his best performance in a Manchester United shirt. Extremely calm, extremely composed on the ball, shifts it lovely, plays really nicely between the lines, but missed 2 massive chances. The cutback and, of course, the one when it kind of bobbles across to him from Christian Eriksen. Those chances have got to go in big games. There were chances against Liverpool as well, and I don't want to focus on Zirkzee because I actually think he started his career really well. But when Højlund comes back, he's got to hit the ground running. We cannot have another 6-month period without a Premier League goal. The strikers need to take the chances that Bruno Fernandes and co are creating right now because they're coming in quite a big volume. So overall, I think it's kind of a positive problem to have because you're creating that many chances in the first place, and across the course of the season, XG kind of does level out usually, unless it's an absolute freak season like United had last year where they were very lucky to finish where they did. I think give it time, Xerxes will start to score goals, and I think Højlund's return will be key to Manchester United. Let's go to Southampton. Clear as day what the biggest issue there is. Right now, everybody's talking about it. It's Southampton's unwillingness to change their style of play, and to a level, I totally respect Russell Martin for it. Why should he compromise his principles? The principles that have got him to where he is right now in the Premier League are possession-based, playing out from the back, from deep to create chances. They got him promoted in the first place. I'm aware he changed his style in the playoffs against Leeds. And they're much more likely to get him a big job in the future. You know, loads has been made of Burnley and Vincent Kompany, this similar sort of tact of we're going to play the Burnley way, the Vincent Kompany way. Nobody is hiring at the top level, elite level, long ball coaching. They want players to play out from the back. They want a very clear philosophy and style of play that builds from deep. That is why Vincent Kompany was able to get the Bayern Munich job. He stuck by his philosophy to the death. And the death of Burnley was relegation. But that got him the Bayern job. And I'm sure in Russell Martin's mind, playing out from the back is actually a safer way of defending for Southampton than going long, losing the ball and facing waves of attack. Because right now, they're keeping the 7th most possession of any side in Europe. And that does limit opposition's ability to attack them because they've got the ball, the second highest percentage possession in the Premier League behind Manchester City. But the big problem comes is that they are not able to resist the press as well as they were in the Championship. The press is far more structured and dynamic in the Premier League. And when they win the ball back off Southampton, it's far more ruthless. Teams will punish you. They will absolutely punish you 2 or 3 goals per game if you give the ball away in deep areas. Southampton have made the most errors leading to goals of any team in the Premier League so far this season, and that's got to change. I still think Southampton should stick roughly by the philosophy. I wouldn't start going to this long ball, changing everything up, because if you do that, as Russell Martin, you lose all of the players' confidence. They start to think, well, he's immediately gone away from what he wanted to do. That's what got us promoted in the first place. But you can adapt a little bit. It's worrying. It's a worrying trend, and I do think Southampton are probably going to go down. But they're going to go down with a little bit of style and at least playing the way they want to play. Let's go to Arsenal. Barely any issues. To be honest with you, they've started the season pretty well, but lots of suggestions for the PGMOL. I mean, yeah, with the Rice issue, we're not going to talk about that, though. I think it's fair that we talk about the other problem, which a few Arsenal fans were suggesting, is Gabriel Martinelli. And I can see where they're coming from, because he hasn't put up a goal involvement, 0 goals, 0 assists, in his last 14 Premier League games. So not just this season, the back end of last season was a bit of a struggle for the Brazilian too. When you compare that to the season before, you know, he put up 20 goal involvements. Last season, it was 10 goal involvements. We're yet to see a goal involvement this season. And I think there is starting to be rumblings of, we should start Trossard. We should start Sterling. Whereas 18 months ago, Martinelli was very much the guy out on that left wing. Martinelli and Saka are the future of the club. I feel like that narrative has just shifted a little bit over the last 6 months. But let's not forget, he is still just 23 years old. I like Trossard, personally, coming off the bench and having impacts. I almost think he's better coming off the bench and having impacts in games. Take, for instance, the Aston Villa game where, of course, he came on for Gabriel Martinelli and had that huge impact, taking that chance really well. He celebrates kind of, why am I not getting a start? Well, the answer to that, I think, is that Martinelli's off-the-ball work is absolutely sensational. Now, that's not to say Trossard's isn't, but when they defend in this sort of 4-4-2 shape with Timber and Ben White tucking in tight alongside the centre-backs and the wingers almost operating as wing-backs, they're extremely hard to break down. Saka and Martinelli's defensive work is massively underrated. So where do we put this? I mean, his goal-scoring output is worrying, but his overall play for me is still really good. I think give it time. He's 23 years old. Don't panic. Don't rush into anything. Yes, Sterling might get the occasional start, as might Trossard, but Arsenal's brilliance is their defensive ability, and I think Martinelli is crucial to it. I'm honestly not that worried about Martinelli. Let's go to Brentford. Their fans were suggesting attacking depth. I mean, I suppose this is a little bit of a concern following the Vissa news that he's out for at least 2 months. Without Tony there, Gustavo Nunez has picked up a stress fracture as well since arriving from Brazil. Igor Thiago obviously has that meniscus problem. It's unlikely he's going to be back in 2024. You really only got, Mbeumo and then a makeshift forward line. And the reason I'm actually going to put this in that's worrying is the goal scoring numbers last season were so heavily reliant on Wissa and Mbeumo. Last season you had Wissa, who was the only player in double figures. He scored 12 goals. If he's out for 3 months, it's an issue because Mbeumo scored 9. Then you had Mopé on 6. You had Tony on 4. Behind them, you had Jensen on 3. So 2 of those players have subsequently left the club in Mopé and Tony. Wissa is now injured. You had Mbeumo who scored 9 goals, and the second top scorer that's still available to play is Matthias Jensen on 3. The pressure on Kevin Schade ramps up exponentially. He absolutely has to start scoring goals in Wissa's absence. Just 333 minutes of football last season because of that major injury mean that he really shouldn't even be forced to play every minute of every game this season, but he's going to have to now. That worries me a little bit about Brentford because I was already worried about the attacking depth at the club in the summer. So I think it is a problem. Bournemouth, a couple of fans were suggesting Evan Nilsson. Look, I'm putting this straight in, give it time. I really think some of the narratives being created about him, specifically following that penalty miss against Chelsea, have gone over the top. People calling him a flop because he's missed a couple of big chances, he's missed a penalty against Chelsea. I actually think his off-the-ball work has been exceptional. Most of the chances he's created himself. A large proportion of his 2.2 XG have been from dynamic runs, great movement in the box that he probably should have scored. But he's 24 years old, arriving in a brand new league without a huge history of goal scoring. He's never scored more than 15 league goals, even in Liga NOS. I think across the last 2 seasons, he's gone 12.7 XG, 14 XG as well. So we're not talking about a player who's putting up massive volume of shots, massive volume of XG. If he does that in the Premier League, that'd be absolutely fine for Bournemouth. I'm aware Solanke scored 18 last season, but they have enough quality in the forward line with the likes of Semenyo, Cliver, Sinisterra to support an Evan Nilsson dip. Stop writing players off after 4 games. He's actually going to be fine, I'm convinced. Leicester fans made 2 suggestions. First and foremost was defensive football, but still conceding goals. I think they have got to get used to this a little bit with Steve Cooper. It's not going to be the free-flowing, on-the-ball, possession-heavy brand of football you saw under Maresca in the Championship. It is going to be far more pragmatic. We saw a midfield 3 away at Palace at the weekend of Skip, Winks and Ndidi. I actually kind of like Ndidi in the 10. We saw Ndidi do really good work in the Championship in the 10. Might not be the most technical player, but he's actually kind of effective there. So I wouldn't at all be surprised to see that continue. The other problem was an over-reliance on Jamie Vardy, and I do think this is a worry. Obviously, he started the season really well. 2 goals, both of them, particularly the one against Palace, taken really, really well. Classic Jamie Vardy finish, taking it around the keeper and scoring from that angle. And across the last 365 days of football, he has averaged 0.7 non-penalty expected goals per 90. The majority of those minutes were in the Championship, yes, but it's still very effective. But the problem develops when you look at Jamie Vardy's minutes. Last season, 18 starts in the Championship. That was the lowest volume of starts Jamie Vardy has put up since 2013. That's over a decade ago now. And the guy is 37 years old. He cannot be relied upon for the entire season as Leicester's number 9. Behind him, Patson Daka has not got a proven history of being able to score Premier League goals, so that leaves Mavididi to score effectively. When you're playing this defensively, either Vardy or Mavididi have to score goals. Mavididi is 26. This is his first Premier League season. Yes, he scored 12 last year, but the reliance on Vardy is a big worry for me. If Vardy picks up an injury, who scores Leicester's goals? Let's go to Villa, and the problem suggested was keeping Jhon Duran happy. This is an easy fix, man. Let's have it absolutely right. This kid is a superstar in waiting. Now, obviously, so far this season, he's got the best minutes to goal ratio of any player in the league. No surprise there, is it? He comes on, has huge impact. He scored 3 winners as a substitute already this season. That is a Premier League record for a single campaign. 7 of his 8 Premier League goals have come as a substitute. But we've got to stop acting like that is a problem. He's 20 years old. He will get minutes in the Cups, in the Champions League, I'm sure, and slowly in the Premier League. Ollie Watkins enacts Unai Emery's game plan from the kickoff perfectly. Yes, he misses some high-profile chances. We saw him miss high-profile chances against Everton. We also saw him score 2 goals. These two will balance minutes fine. This is not a problem. A 20-year-old striker should not be starting every game. He shouldn't. Having a balance of a 20-year-old striker and Ollie Watkins come the end of the season will be perfect. If Jhon Duran starts 15 to 20 games this season, it's ideal. This isn't even a problem. This is the easiest fixed on the list. At Ipswich, the fans were saying conceding too many big chances, and that is fair enough. But when you look at the start of the season, City, Liverpool, Brighton, these are incredibly tough games. Like, nobody's expecting Ipswich to get anything out of these games. Yes, they are conceding at a slightly concerning volume. The chance volume will drop. They are not going to continue to concede chances like this. They've played such tough opposition that they were always going to get bullied. I think Kieran McKenna will be absolutely fine. He'll be a picture of calm behind the scenes. Give it time, and Ipswich's defensive record will improve. It won't continue at this rate. Brighton, the fans were suggesting the expectations are too high now. I mean, really? I mean, this is an easy fix. They're not that high. Let's be absolutely real. Fabian Hurtzer is a 31-year-old manager who's managed 4 Premier League games. The last couple of seasons were very impressive for Brighton. But last year, they finished 11th. Honestly, they're playing some of the best football in the league. They pin teams in. They create massive amounts of chances. The centre-back pairing is extremely settled, and they haven't even had their ideal midfield 3 playing properly yet. The expectation's fine. The club is fine. I'm not going to agree with fan sentiment about the problem being that expectations within are too high. Let's go to Manchester City, and obviously Pep Guardiola's contract remains a problem, but the real problem City fans were saying is the 115 charges, and there's no other way to look at this other than putting it in the oh dear category, because the pressure externally is mounting. Man City internally, I'm sure, a picture of calm. They, of course, deny all of the charges. On the field, they look imperious. Erling Haaland, the best goal scorer I've ever seen play in the Premier League, looks like he could score 40 Premier League goals this season, and I'm not exaggerating. But off the field, this is becoming a bit of a circus. These news reports every single day are going to continue to come out about this case. We're going to have a hearing in 10 weeks. Whatever the result of that hearing is going to be massive news. It probably is going to affect things on the pitch a little bit. It's very hard to shut that noise out. Yeah, I think 115 charges hanging over their head right now is a major problem. I think that has to be an oh dear. Let's go to Crystal Palace, and I want to talk about the biggest problem for them being the fact they're such slow starters. And this is a sort of trend across Ollie Glasner's managerial career. Last season, they finished so strongly. There's no denying that. They were 7 unbeaten, the 4-0 against United, the 5-0 against Villa, 1 away at Anfield. Absolutely incredible. But this season, not only are they slow starters in the campaign, they're slow starters in games. They've been losing at half-time in all 4 fixtures so far. That can't happen. It feels like they're slightly off. Everything's not quite working. The press isn't quite working. The passing through the lines isn't quite switched on. Even players like Mark Gahey look a little bit off the pace. Maybe that transfer's had an effect. But for Ollie Glasner, this issue runs a little bit deeper. Let's not forget, we can talk about the success at the end of the season for Palace. It was 1 win in his first 6 Palace games. It was also 1 win in his first 10 games when he took over Frankfurt. Wolfsburg didn't win any of their opening 5 matches under him. This is a clear trend. At the start of new seasons or taking over clubs, Glasner takes a little bit of time to bed in. This, I was hoping, wouldn't be the case in the start of the second season at Palace, but apparently it's going to be. Now I'm going to stay confident about Crystal Palace. I actually loved the first 11 that was put out at the weekend. I know it didn't perform, but on paper, it just excited me. Love Wharton and Doucouré as a midfield too. And finally, a little and a large strike partnership. Let's get it popping, please. I hope Palace turn it around. And Glasner's record, kind of, if that trend continues of the slow start, it proves out that across the second half of the season and after the sort of first 10 games, Palace is going to get an awful lot better. So fingers crossed that happens. I'm going to put it in time for now, but it's one to keep your eye on. As for Chelsea, there's no denying, in attack, they still look quite exciting, don't they? I think some of their squad are really good. They've got loads of really good players in there, but they are still quite defensively fragile, and that's been proven out this season. By expected goals against, they're 9th in the table. Now, it's a very small sample size. It's just 4 games, and game state does play a large part of this, doesn't it? But if you look at the individual games, in every match this season so far, other than one, which is actually Crystal Palace at home, which they drew. They've been beaten in XG by the opposition. The opposition are able to create huge chances against them. Now, I think Levi Colwill and Cucurella have actually started the season well. I also don't think Fofana has been that bad. Right back's had some injury issues, which tells me if all of the players are actually doing okay, there's actually a structural issue going on there because they are giving up amazing quality chances at least once or twice a game. That will improve, I'm sure, as Maresca's system starts to bed in. There might be a bit of an issue in the midfield dynamic with Caicedo and Enzo being too easily bypassed, and that's probably one of the reasons. But again, I'm not that concerned. I actually think the Chelsea squad is pretty good, and they've actually started the season quite well. Okay, Newcastle. Now on the field, they've started the season all right. Not playing amazingly, but picking up plenty of points. But off the field, that Eddie Howe versus Paul Mitchell situation is starting to become a big problem. Now, during the summer, obviously, they had the extended pursuit of Mark Gahey. It didn't work. Dan Ashworth left. Paul Mitchell came in. And it all seemed a bit of a mess, didn't it? I don't think the interview Paul Mitchell gave, I'm not sure which outlet it was, when he said that the transfer strategy was not fit for purpose, was a good idea. Because a lot of the players that Newcastle have signed in that transfer strategy under Eddie Howe, Botman, Guimaraes, Isak, Tino Livramento, Nick Pope, Kieran, they've all been pretty good signings. And therefore it wasn't a surprise to me when I saw Eddie Howe sort of hit back at his own sporting director publicly and defend the signings, defend the players. I don't understand what Mitchell's goal was when he came out to try and sort of defend himself. And I also didn't particularly understand when he said, I didn't really have much involvement in the summer business, when the reports were very clear that he was leading the pursuit of Mark Gahey, which went to deadline day and never appeared to happen. Add to that the fact that the England job still lingers, and this sort of clashing behind the scenes of Mitchell and Eddie Howe is not a great look. Eddie Howe, since he took over, has taken the 4th most points in the Premier League. He took over a team in the relegation zone. Only City, Arsenal and Liverpool are taking more points than him. He's had a season where the injury problems were basically a plague. And for me, this is oh dear, because I do not understand what they're doing. Eddie Howe has done a masterful job, and these clashes are quite public. Their interviews with the press. It's not a great watch. Let's go to Everton, and the problem suggested by the fans generally was sort of a loyalty to players. Too much loyalty from Sean Dyche, not enough adaptation from the manager. I think this really stems down to the fact he's picked Michael Keane quite a lot over Jake O'Brien, this big summer signing from Lyon. And Michael Keane's kind of been exposed a couple of times, hasn't he? Particularly against Aston Villa, jumping under the ball. Again, I'm actually really concerned about this Everton situation, because the performances themselves haven't been terrible. They dominated Bournemouth for 75 minutes of the game. They were pretty good against Villa and created massive chances, which is hard to do against an Unai Emery side. But still, that narrative and that poison that seems to have developed around the club right now is really concerning. Surely we are going to see a shift away from Sean Dyche's traditional selection of, Michael Keane, players like Ashley Young being picked, being moved over to left back, James Garner being... surely we're going to see some of the other options given a chance at the start of this season. But I feel like for the first time, the fans are really starting to question Sean Dyche. I wouldn't be questioning him too much, but that problem of perception when John Textor is coming out, the prospective owner, and sort of giving these quotes against Sean Dyche, against the squad, it makes me feel quite uncomfortable. It does make me feel quite uncomfortable. It's a worrying time for Everton. Liverpool, not many problems on the pitch. I know it was a bad result against Nottingham Forest, but I love this Forest side, and they can do that to you in transition if you don't take your chances. A couple of problems being suggested. One was Darwin Núñez. I just don't think he's going to get an awful lot of minutes under Arne Slot. I think Arne Slot, the way he wants his forwards to operate, how he wants players to retain possession, probably not going to suit Darwin Núñez. The biggest problem, the contracts. And that remains an oh dear. The fact that Trent doesn't have a contract right now, past the summer, he can sign a pre-contract with a European club in January, which is 3 months away. Massive problem. Virgil van Dijk, he's 33 now, but he's still probably, in my opinion, the best centre-back in the league, vying with Gabriel and Saliba. Still not got a contract situation. Mo Salah spoke publicly after the Manchester United game, saying he still hadn't been approached from anyone at the club. Now, maybe that was a negotiating tactic, a posturing tactic, but he's still probably the best winger in the league. 3 of Liverpool's best players are out of contract in the summer. That is crazy to me. That's crazy, particularly Trent. Like, how has this not been? Any other club, if this was happening at, I would be even more concerned. Liverpool, for some reason, because of how well they've been running the past, because of how good of a job Michael Edwards has done, I'm not as concerned. But if I was a Liverpool fan, I'd be sweating. It's a big problem, isn't it? Okay, so those were some of the club's biggest problems this season. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit the like button, hit subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you later. Goodbye.